The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched vast and circular, like a massive arena carved from pure crystal. Representatives from 200 species sat in their designated sections watching as Ambassador Krellix of the Valorian Empire approached the central platform. His scales glimmered under the artificial lights as he raised his forearms in the traditional gesture of formal address. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of translation devices worn by every delegate present. Honored council members, Krellix began, his voice carrying across the space without need for amplification. I come before you today to propose the repeal of a designation that has stood for 2 centuries, the classification of humanity as special forces. A ripple of noise swept through the chamber. Some species chittered nervously, while others remained perfectly still in that way that suggested deep contemplation or concern. Krellix continued without pause. 200 years ago, we made a decision based on limited data and fearful speculation. Surely after 2 centuries of peaceful coexistence, we can acknowledge that this designation serves no purpose beyond creating unnecessary tension. The head of the council, an ancient being known only as the Arbiter, leaned forward in their floating throne. Their form shifted between states of matter in a way that hurt to watch directly. Ambassador Krellix, the Arbiter's voice resonated through every translator simultaneously. Before we consider your proposal, perhaps we should review how this designation came to be. Let the younger species present understand what they ask us to forget. The Arbiter gestured, and the chamber's center filled with holographic light. Images began to form showing a moment from 2 centuries past. A small delegation of humans had arrived at the council chambers. For the first time, they looked so ordinary compared to the magnificent diversity of galactic civilization surrounding them. The humans were not particularly tall like the Krogoth, whose warriors stood 3 times human height. They were not heavily armored like the Silixian, whose natural shells could withstand plasma fire. They did not possess the vast intellect of the Cero Collective, whose thoughts moved faster than most species could speak. The humans had come in simple uniforms carrying gifts and messages of peace. Their leader, a woman named Ambassador Chun, had spoken eloquently about humanity's desire to join the galactic community and contribute to the common good. The memory continued playing out across the holographic display. The council of that era had debated humanity's placement in their military classification system. Every species that joined the council received a military designation. This was not meant as an insult, but as a practical assessment of defensive and offensive capabilities. The categories were clear and simple. Standard forces for most species whose military strength was average and predictable. Heavy forces for species with exceptional physical or technological advantages. Special forces for species with unique capabilities that required special consideration. An extinction class for the handful of species so dangerous that their very existence posed a threat to all life. The humans, by all assessments, seemed destined for standard forces. They had decent technology but nothing revolutionary. Their physical capabilities were average. Their warships were functional but unremarkable. Then the Valdari representative had stood. His species were known as efficient warriors who prided themselves on tactical superiority. Before we vote, the Valdari had said in that long-ago session, I must share something with the council. 3 months ago, there was an incident in the border territories near Valdari space. The hologram shifted to show a remote colony world. A small research outpost with perhaps 50 civilians conducting studies on alien biology. A group of Valdari privateers. The representative continued with obvious shame. 200 warriors operating outside government sanction attacked this colony. They believed it to be an easy target. 50 unarmed researchers and only 3 human security personnel. The hologram showed grainy security footage. 3 humans in light armor taking defensive positions as 200 heavily armed Valdari raiders approached what Follow defied everything the council thought they understood about combat dynamics. The three humans did not retreat or call for surrender. They moved with frightening coordination, using the terrain in ways the Voldari had not anticipated. The footage showed one human soldier, a woman barely reaching half the height of her attackers, taking down 7 Voldari in rapid succession, using nothing but a standard rifle and what appeared to be a combat knife. Another human turned a damaged shield generator into a weapon that exploded and eliminated an entire squad. The third human fought for 12 hours straight without stopping, even after sustaining wounds that should have been fatal. When reinforcements arrived 2 days later, they found all 3 humans alive, defending the colonists who had taken shelter in the research station. They found 197 dead Voldari and 3 who had fled in terror. The council chamber watching this recording sat in stunned silence, but the Voldari representative was not finished. He produced more files, more incidents that painted an impossible picture: a human merchant ship captured by pirates. The pirates released the ship 6 hours later and turned themselves into authorities. They refused to explain what happened during those 6 hours, but none ever attempted piracy again. A human medical team taken hostage during a planetary evacuation. Their captors had tried to use them as leverage against human military forces. The medics escaped on their own, and their captors were found unconscious, bound with medical tape. A human diplomatic courier who survived a crash landing on a death world, classified as unsurvivable. She walked out of that wilderness 3 weeks later, having somehow tamed one of the planet's apex predators. Species after species came forward with similar accounts. Humans who refused to surrender under any circumstances. Humans who turned any object into a weapon. Humans who kept fighting with injuries that would kill most species instantly. The Cerebral Collective representative had analyzed human historical data available in their databases. What they found disturbed the entire council. Humanity's home world was a death world by galactic standards: extreme weather, dangerous predators, natural disasters. Most species would classify such a planet as uninhabitable. Yet humans called it home. Human history was an endless cycle of warfare. They fought each other with dedication that bordered on madness for reasons other species found hard to understand: ideology, religion, resources, territory, pride. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet multiple times over. They had looked at mutual extinction as a possible military strategy and developed doctrine around it. They had concepts in their military thinking that other species lacked words for: scorched earth tactics, where they would destroy everything rather than let an enemy have it. Victories were weighing costs so much it was barely different from losing, yet they celebrated these outcomes. Last stands, where soldiers chose certain death over retreat because it might buy others time. They're not the strongest, the Cerebral Collective representative had concluded. They are not the fastest or the smartest, but they possess something more dangerous: absolute refusal to accept defeat. They do not have a word for surrender in some of their languages. They tell stories that celebrate those who died fighting impossible odds. They are a species that sees extinction and chooses to fight anyway. The holographic memory faded, returning the council chamber to the present. Ambassador Krulix stood silent, his earlier confidence visibly shaken by the reminder of evidence he must have reviewed before making his proposal. The Arbiter spoke again. The vote 2 centuries ago was unanimous. Every species agreed that humanity should be classified as special forces with the notation: avoid military engagement under all circumstances. We did not make this designation out of fear, the Arbiter continued. We made it out of respect. Respect for what humans are capable of when threatened. Respect for the fact that a species which treats impossible odds as merely inconvenient should never be taken lightly. Krulix bowed his head in acknowledgement of the wisdom in those words. I withdraw my proposal, he said quietly. The session ended with the designation unchanged. Humanity remained the only species ever unanimously classified as special forces. Remained the only species that the galaxy hoped never to encounter in battle. In a small observation gallery above the chamber, General Sarah Chun of Earth's diplomatic corps watched the proceedings end. She turned to her aide and spoke quietly. They still don't really understand, she said with a tone that mixed sadness and something darker. Her aide looked confused. Doesn't the designation protect them from us? Chun shook her head slowly. No. It protects us from what we become if we ever had to show them what special forces really means. They saw 3 soldiers defend a colony and think they understand. They don't understand at all. What happened on that colony was restraint. Chun continued. Those 3 soldiers could have done so much worse. They chose not to because the threat didn't require it. The galaxy labeled us special forces based on us holding back. Her aide went pale as the implication sank in. What would happen if we didn't hold back? Chun looked out at the council chamber where delegates were filing out, secure in their belief that the designation protected them. Let's hope. Zexatha considered himself a practical warrior. He came from a long line of Threen fighters who had served with distinction in various conflicts across the galaxy for 3 generations. Threen were respected throughout known space as competent soldiers, strong, disciplined, and fearless in battle. Zexatha had trained since childhood in combat techniques passed down through his family, but he had never fought humans. And frankly, he did not believe the stories that circulated through military circles, like ghost tales, meant to frighten recruits. The training hall echoed with the sounds of practice combat as Zexatha and his fellow recruits sparred under the watchful eye of instructor Vashtar. The instructor was old for a Threen, his scales marked with scars that told stories of countless battles. Again, Vashtar commanded as Zexatha completed another drill sequence. Your form is adequate, but your mindset is weak. You fight like you expect your opponent to follow rules. Zexatha straightened and faced his instructor with confusion written across his features. We are training for military service. All military forces follow the conventions of warfare. Vashtar made a sound that might have been laughter but contained no humor whatsoever. Sit down, all of you. Let me tell you about an opponent who doesn't care about conventions. The recruits gathered around as their instructor lowered himself onto a training mat. He gestured to the largest scar running across his chest, a wound that looked like it should have been fatal. This came from a human, Vashtar said quietly, letting the words sink in before adding, but not a human soldier, not a warrior or special operative. He paused, watching his students' reactions before continuing. I was part of a peacekeeping force in the contested zone 15 years ago. There was a medical station that got caught between 2 warring factions who cared nothing for civilian casualties. We arrived to evacuate the medical personnel, doctors, nurses, civilian staff. Among them was one human, a medic named Dr. Sarah Kimura, who refused to abandon her patients. Vashtar's voice took on a tone his students had never heard before, something between deep respect and genuine fear. The hostile forces arrived before we could complete the evacuation. They wanted hostages. They thought medical personnel would be easy to capture, because what doctor would fight back? Dr. Kimura had 30 wounded patients in her care, various species, including some from the hostile faction itself. She refused to leave them. We tried to explain that she would die if she stayed. She told us that was acceptable if it bought her patients time to be rescued. The instructor touched his scar with one claw. I stayed with her. I thought I could protect her until reinforcements arrived. I was wrong about many things. Not about protecting her. I was wrong about who would need protection. Zexatha leaned forward, drawn into the story despite his earlier skepticism about human capabilities. The hostile forces sent 50 soldiers to take the medical station by force. Dr. Kimura had a surgical knife, a few medical tools, and various supplies meant for healing. She had no weapons, no armor, no combat training that I could observe. She set traps using medical equipment in ways I had never imagined. Turned oxygen tanks into explosive devices. Used surgical tools meant for precision cuts as weapons. Fought with her bare hands when nothing else was available. I was wounded early in the engagement. This scar, you see. She dragged me to safety despite my size being twice hers. Sealed my wound with a tool meant for stopping bleeding during surgery, and told me to stay down and not interfere. Then she went back out to continue fighting. When reinforcements arrived 6 hours later, they found 27 hostile soldiers, either unconscious or dead from their wounds. Dr. Kimura was still standing over her patients with burns covering her arms. Cuts across her face, 3 broken bones in her hands. And she was still standing. She looked at the reinforcement commander and said, just 3 words. They're all stable, meaning her patients, not herself. She had fought for 6 hours to protect beings she had never met before, and her first concern was still their well-being. The training hall had gone completely silent. Zexatha felt something cold settle in his stomach like ice water. That was a medic. Vashtor emphasized, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Not a soldier. Not trained for combat. Not equipped for war. Just a doctor who refused to let her patients die. Now imagine what their actual warriors are capable of when properly armed and trained. One of the other recruits, bolder than the rest, spoke up with false confidence. Surely, that's just one exceptional case. One human in extraordinary circumstances, producing an unusual outcome. Vashtor shook his head firmly. That's exactly what I thought too. So I did research. I looked into human history, human culture, human military records. What I found changed my understanding of warfare itself. He stood and walked to a display panel, pulling up images and data that filled the screen. Humans come from a death world category 8 on the habitability scale. Most species would die within days on their planet from exposure alone. They evolved alongside predators that actively hunted them for food. They learned to hunt those predators back. They became apex predators on a world that constantly tries to kill everything living on it. Their weather patterns include storms that can destroy cities in hours. They have volcanic eruptions that block out their sun, earthquakes that split the ground, waves as tall as buildings. Their planet is actively hostile to life, and they just adapt and continue. The display shifted to show images from human history battles, wars, conflicts spanning thousands of years. They have been fighting each other since before they developed writing. They created agriculture and immediately started fighting over farmland. They built civilizations and immediately went to war with neighboring civilizations. Look at these weapons. Vashtor pulled up technical diagrams that made several recruits gasp. Chemical weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. Biological weapons that target specific genetic markers. Nuclear weapons that can destroy continents. And they aimed all of these at themselves, at their own kind. They called a period when they developed world-ending weapons, but didn't use them the Cold War. They spent decades with the capability to end all life on their planet. They stared into mutual extinction every single day, and somehow chose restraint over annihilation. Zexatha studied the data with growing unease. The numbers seemed impossible to believe, conflicts lasting decades or even centuries. Battles where millions died. Weapons that could make their entire world uninhabitable. And yet humans survived all of it, multiplied. Eventually unified enough to reach the stars. But they're peaceful now. Another recruit argued with desperation in his voice. They've been members of galactic society for 200 years without major incident. Surely that proves they've changed? Vashtor's expression grew grim and serious. They're peaceful, because they choose to be. That's precisely what makes them so terrifying. They have the capacity for unlimited violence, but they restrain it through choice and willpower alone. I spoke with a human merchant once, Vashter continued. Asked him directly about human nature. He told me something I'll never forget. He said humans are apex predators playing at civilization. He said every human learns as a child exactly how to hurt others, but spends their whole life learning when not to use that knowledge. The instructor brought up another file filled with commercial and legal data. The Galactic Insurance Consortium has a special category for any conflict involving humans. The premiums are 10 times normal rates because the risk is calculated as catastrophic. Pirate organizations maintain blacklists of ships. They won't attack under any circumstances. Every human vessel is on those lists. Mercenary companies refuse contracts against human targets, regardless of how much payment is offered. The risk simply isn't worth any amount of money. Even organized crime syndicates avoid operating in human territories because the cost of retaliation is too high. Exatha felt his certainty crumbling under the weight of accumulated evidence. But we outnumber them substantially. The galaxy has trillions of beings and only billions of humans. Surely numbers would prevail in any real conflict. Numbers mean nothing to humans. Vashter interrupted sharply. Humans have a saying, quantity has a quality all its own, meaning large numbers can overcome skill. But they also say that one human in the right place at the right time can change everything. They believe both things simultaneously because to them, both statements are equally true. The training session resumed, but Zexay hadn't focused properly. His mind kept returning to the stories, the data, the disturbing implications of what it all meant. That evening he found himself in one of the station's recreational areas where various species mingled together, trading stories and relaxing after their duties. A human sat at the bar, a merchant by her casual clothing, laughing with a Solixian trader over some shared joke that seemed completely innocent. She looked so normal, so harmless, so utterly unremarkable as Extath approached hesitantly. "Excuse me. May I ask you something personal?" The human turned with a friendly smile that seemed genuine. "Sure thing. What's on your mind? Are the stories true?" he asked bluntly, abandoning any pretense of diplomatic courtesy. "About humans in combat situations." Her smile didn't fade, but something changed in her eyes, a depth that hadn't been visible a moment before. Something old and knowing. "Which stories specifically?" Asterisk. The first sign of the Zalthine came from the Outer Rim territories, where deep space monitoring stations detected an anomaly that shouldn't exist according to known physics. A tear in space-time that grew larger. With each passing hour, Commander Threxil of the Galactic Defense Force watched the readings with growing alarm. Nothing in known science could create a rift of such magnitude. Nothing, except perhaps deliberate action by something with technology far beyond current galactic standards. "Send probes through immediately," he ordered his crew with urgency in his voice. "We need to know what's on the other side before it becomes a threat." 3 automated probes entered the rift transmitting data. Their telemetry lasted exactly 47 seconds before all signals ceased. Simultaneously, without warning, Threxil felt his stomach twist painfully. That wasn't equipment failure or signal interference. That was something actively destroying the probes faster than they could transmit warnings. The answer came within hours when the first Zalthine ships emerged from the rift like nightmares, becoming real. They were massive organic-looking vessels that moved like living things rather than constructed craft. They didn't follow standard ship designs because they weren't ships in any traditional sense. They were creatures, biomechanical nightmares that pulsed with alien energy. The monitoring station's final transmission showed thousands of these vessels pouring through the rift like insects from a disturbed hive. Then the station went dark forever. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session as reports flooded in from the Rim territories. Colony after colony went silent. Defense stations ceased transmitting. Entire systems seemed to vanish from contact within hours. The Arbiter called for reports from military commanders across the galaxy. What they heard painted a picture of horror beyond imagination. "They don't communicate at all," reported Admiral Zhenka of the Silixian fleet. Her voice strained with stress. "We've tried every known form of contact radio. Laser, quantum, even chemical signals. They simply attack without any attempt at dialogue. Their tactics are overwhelming in their simplicity," she continued. "They swarm targets with massive numbers, adapt to our weapons within minutes, and show no concern for casualties. Destroying 1,000 of them just brings 10,000 more. We engage them at the Tyrian system," added General Cross of the Krogoth Legions. "My forces are the finest warriors in the galaxy, trained from birth for combat. We killed thousands of them using every tactic we know. It made absolutely no difference. For everyone we destroyed, 10 more took its place immediately." The Cerebral Collective representative provided the analysis. Everyone feared, based on current data and observation. The Zalthine are a hive mind species operating as a single consciousness, controlling billions of individual units. They show no fear, no hesitation, no self-preservation instinct at the individual level. More concerning, the representative continued with unusual emotion in their synthesized voice. "We've detected traces of their presence in other galaxies through deep space observation and analysis. Every galaxy they've touched is now dead. No life signs, no transmissions, no electromagnetic activity. Nothing but silence and empty worlds." The chamber filled with the sounds of distress from various species. The implications were devastatingly clear. The Zalthine didn't conquer territories or colonize planets. They consumed everything organic and moved on to the next target. The Arbiter called for strategic proposals. Military commanders from across the galaxy presented desperate plans. Conventional warfare had already failed completely. The Zalthine adapted too quickly to standard tactics, and their numbers seemed infinite. The Valorian Empire suggested deploying their Nova-class weapons devices, capable of igniting stars and destroying entire systems. The cost would be unthinkable, but it might create barrier of dead space the Zalthine couldn't cross. The Cerebral Collective proposed releasing the imprisoned AI entities. Locked away centuries ago, artificial intelligences so advanced, they had become dangerous to organic life. Perhaps they could fight a hive mind on equal terms, others suggested. Activating ancient superweapons left behind by extinct species weapons, so terrible that galactic law forbade their study or reconstruction under any circumstances. Each proposal was worse than the last. Each would cost trillions of lives and might still fail to stop the advance. The projections were unanimous. At current rates of expansion, the Zalthine would consume 78% of the galaxy's population within 2 cycle. Species were already evacuating core worlds, fleeing toward Galactic Center in desperate hope that distance might buy time. Entire civilizations were preparing for extinction in this atmosphere of despair and mounting panic. One figure sat quietly observing without contributing. General Sarah Chun represented humanity at the council. She had listened to every proposal without comment or reaction. Now, as the debate reached its peak of desperation, she stood calmly. The chamber fell silent immediately. Everyone knew what humans were. Everyone knew their designation. And everyone wondered with mixed hope and fear what the Special Forces species would say about an extinction-level crisis. "You have one other option," Chun said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You can invoke Article 7 of the Special Forces Protocol." The Arbiter leaned forward in their throne, their form shifting with what might have been surprise. Article 7 has never been invoked. It was written as a theoretical contingency that we hoped would never be needed. It exists for exactly this situation. Chun interrupted without apology. Existential threat to galactic civilization. Conventional forces proven insufficient. All other options either exhausted or too costly. Krelix of the Valorian Empire stood abruptly, his scales showing colors of agitation and concern. Article 7 authorizes unrestricted warfare. It removes all limitations on military action. It essentially tells a species to do whatever necessary without regard for conventions, laws, or ethical constraints. Yes, Chun agreed simply. That's exactly what it does and exactly what you need. We wrote that article for humans specifically, another delegate said with obvious fear. We wrote it because we feared what would happen if they were ever freed from all restraint. Chun's expression didn't change at all. You wrote it because deep down you knew there might come a day when you needed us to be what we really are. Today is that day, whether you like it or not. The Cerebral Collective Representative accessed historical records rapidly. Article 7 was proposed during the drafting of the Special Forces Protocol 200 years ago. It states, in the event of an existential threat to galactic civilization, species classified as special, forces may be authorized for unrestricted warfare with all conventional limitations suspended. The article continues with specific provisions. They added, authorized species operate under their own command structure, bear no responsibility for collateral damage or civilian casualties, and must be granted full access to all military resources and intelligence without restriction or oversight. The debate exploded across the chamber in multiple languages simultaneously. Some species argued that unleashing humanity without restrictions might be as dangerous as the Zalthine themselves. Others countered that they were already facing certain extinction and had absolutely nothing to lose. You don't understand what you're asking. Vashtar of the Threen spoke up from his position. I've seen what one human can do when defending patients in a medical station with nothing but improvised weapons. Imagine millions of them with no rules holding them back, no conventions to follow, no lines they cannot cross. I understand perfectly, Chun replied coldly. You're asking humanity to become what you've always feared we might be. You're asking us to show you why we're designated special forces. You're asking us to go to war the way only humans know how, without mercy, without restraint, without compromise. The Arbiter called for order. This is not a decision to make lightly or in haste. If we invoke Article 7, we are acknowledging that we trust humanity to save the galaxy, while simultaneously fearing what that salvation will look like. Admiral Zhenka stood, her voice heavy with resignation and acceptance. My fleet is down to 40% strength. I've lost thousands of warriors in just weeks. The Zalthine are 3 systems away from Silixian core worlds and advancing steadily. I vote to invoke Article 7 immediately. One by one, species representatives stood and cast their votes. Some with confidence, others with obvious reluctance, all with the understanding that they were making a choice they might regret forever. The final tally showed narrow approval by the minimum required majority. Article 7 would be invoked. Humanity would be authorized for unrestricted warfare against the Zalthine threat stood as the vote concluded. I need you all to understand something before we proceed with this. When this is over, you're going to want to forget what you're about to see. You won't be able to forget no matter how hard you try. She looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of various delegates. Humans have spent 200 years being peaceful members of galactic society. We've followed your rules, respected your conventions, restrained our true nature. We did this because we chose civilization over violence, but we never forgot how to be what we were before. We never lost the capacity for what you're about to ask us to do. Admiral Zhenka of the Silixian fleet watched from her command ship, as the first human battle group arrived at the front lines. She had fought alongside many species during her long military career, but had never served with humans in actual combat. The human fleet looked unremarkable at first, standard warships of various classes. Nothing that seemed to justify their fearsome special forces designation. Then she watched them deploy for battle. The lead ship, a heavy cruiser called the Indomitable, didn't take up a defensive position as standard military doctrine suggested. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the Zalthine swarm at speeds that should have torn the vessel apart from structural stress. "What are they doing?" her tactical officer asked in complete disbelief. Senna accessed the human fleet's communication channel and heard something that made her blood run cold. The humans were singing. They were flying into battle against a hive mind that had conquered 3 galaxies, and they were singing songs about war and glory. The song had a driving rhythm and words about standing against darkness. It should have been absurd, but instead, it was absolutely terrifying. The Indomitable hit the Zalthine formation like a hammer striking glass. Its weapons fired in patterns that seemed random until Zhenka realized they were targeting structural weak points the humans had identified through some analysis she hadn't seen. Then the Indomitable did something no sane commander would ever order. It rammed a Zalthine hive ship at full speed without hesitation. The explosion should have destroyed both vessels completely, but human escape pods were already launching before impact. Zhenka watched in shock as those pods latched onto nearby Zalthine ships and began cutting their way inside with industrial tools. "They're boarding the enemy vessels," her tactical officer reported with awe in his voice. "Boarding them, the Zalthine ships while they're still in active combat." Human Marines poured into Zalthine ships armed with weapons that seemed designed for close quarters. Brutality rather than precision. They fought through corridors filled with hostile organisms, planting explosives and computer viruses as they advanced. The first Zalthine hive ship went dark from the inside out. Whatever the humans had done, it spread through the vessel like a disease. The massive organic ship convulsed and died within minutes. Zhenka ordered her fleet to support the human tactics, though she barely understood what she was witnessing. Within hours, 3 more hive ships had been neutralized through human boarding actions that defied all military logic. Admiral Cross of the Krogoth watched from a different front line as human ground forces deployed to contested worlds. His people were the finest warriors in the galaxy, bred for combat across generations, but what he witnessed made him question everything he thought he knew about warfare. Human soldiers moved through Zalthine-occupied territory with a casual efficiency that defied logic. They didn't just fight the enemy, they actively hunted them like predators tracking prey. "They're using psychological warfare," his intelligence officer reported with confusion. "They're playing sounds across all frequencies, music, war cries, recorded messages designed to create confusion, even in a hive mind." Cross listened to the human tactical channels and heard conversations that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Soldiers discussing breakfast plans while simultaneously coordinating artillery strikes. Medics humming songs while treating wounded under fire. Commanders joking about sports while planning complex multi-layered assaults. How are they so calm? Cross asked aloud in bewilderment. Human liaison officer attached to his command answered matter-of-factly, "We're not calm, General. We're just comfortable with this. This is what we do. We've been fighting since before recorded history. This is just another Tuesday for us. Just another Tuesday fighting an extinction level threat was just another ordinary day for humanity." The humans employed tactics Cross had never seen in his extensive career. They turned captured Zalthine organisms into weapons against their own hive. They used biological agents specifically engineered to target the Zalthine's unique physiology. They planted what they called mimetic hazards information patterns designed to disrupt hive mind coordination, and they did all of this while maintaining constant communication. Perfect coordination and surprisingly high morale. They treated impossible odds as merely inconvenient obstacles to overcome across multiple fronts. Other species watched in a mixture of awe and horror as humans fought. The Cerebral Collective monitored human battle networks continuously, analyzing their tactical decisions and strategic thinking. What they found challenged their entire understanding of military psychology. They're operating on multiple cognitive levels simultaneously, the lead analyst reported to the council in an emergency briefing. They maintain individual identity while functioning as perfectly coordinated units. They process trauma and stress in real time while continuing combat operations without degradation. They adapt to new threats faster than any species we've ever studied. More disturbing. The analysts continued with what might have been fear in their synthetic voice. They show clear neurological signs of enjoying the challenge. Their brain chemistry indicates heightened engagement and satisfaction when facing difficult combat scenarios. The humans had a phrase for it, adrenaline junkie, and apparently it described a significant portion of their military personnel. They were a species that got a natural biochemical high from facing mortal dangers. Valorian military observers compiled reports on human weapons and tactics that read like horror stories. Humans had developed biological weapons, specifically for the Zalthine that turned the hive mind's greatest strength into its most critical weakness. The more connected the organisms, the faster the weapons spread through their network. They used psychological operations that shouldn't work on hive minds, but somehow did, broadcasts that created discord in the collective consciousness, planted false information that caused tactical errors, even transmitted patterns that seemed to cause something like pain in a distributed intelligence. Their special operations teams infiltrated Zalthine hive nodes, the central coordination points for the swarm, and planted advanced AI constructs that functioned as digital viruses. These constructs spread through the hive network like infections, corrupting coordination and sowing chaos. Most disturbing were reports of human soldiers who had been captured by the Zalthine and somehow escaped or been rescued. They came back with detailed intelligence on hive mind vulnerabilities and an understanding of Zalthine biology that they turned into devastating tactical advantages. One such soldier, a woman named Lieutenant Maria Santos, had been held by the Zalthine for 3 weeks of captivity. When human forces rescued her, she provided information that allowed them to develop a weapon that effectively shut down Zalthine neural coordination in a 50-kilometer radius. When asked how she had survived such prolonged captivity and learned so much, Santos simply said, "I watched them carefully. I learned how they think and communicate. Then I figured out how to make them stop thinking that way." The tide of the war began to turn dramatically. Zalthine forces that had been unstoppable suddenly found themselves fighting an enemy that adapted faster than they did. Human tactics evolved daily, sometimes hourly, as new intelligence was processed and immediately incorporated into combat doctrine. Human ships began operating in ways that defied every principle of standard naval warfare. They used reactor overloads as weapons, turning dying ships into massive explosives. They employed ramming tactics at velocities that should have been suicidal. They even captured Zalthine vessels intact and turned them against their own forces on the ground. Human forces pushed deep into Zalthine-held territory with relentless determination. They didn't just reclaim worlds, they hunted down every last organism and eliminated them with systematic efficiency that bordered on obsessive. The breakthrough came during the Battle of Nexus. Human intelligence had identified what they believed was a primary hive nexus, a coordination center for an entire sector of Zalthine forces. Conventional military wisdom said attacking such a target was suicide. Human command sent in 12 special operations teams anyway. They infiltrated the Nexus through methods that remained classified. What happened inside was pieced together from fragmented communications and later investigation of the site. The humans planted a weapon they called a neural cascade device. It was specifically designed to exploit the Zalthene's hive mind structure by introducing contradictory commands that would spread through the entire network like a virus when activated. The device caused something unprecedented in galactic military history. It caused the Zalthene to fight themselves in massive numbers across 3 entire sectors. Zalthene forces turned on each other as corrupted commands spread through their collective consciousness like wildfire. Hive ships attacked their own formations. Ground forces engaged in chaotic internecine combat that destroyed both sides. The humans had weaponized the hive mind itself against its own structure. For the first time in their multi-galactic expansion, the Zalthene retreated from a target. Their forces pulled back toward the rift, abandoning occupied territory and defensive positions in what appeared to be complete. Panic Admiral Zhenka watched the withdrawal with utter disbelief. They're running. The Zalthene are actually running from battle. General Chun's voice came across the command channel. Calm and matter asterisk. 5 years after the human fleet disappeared through the rift, the Galactic Council convened to address the aftermath of the Zalthene War. The galaxy had survived the greatest threat it had ever faced, but everyone knew the cost had been measured in more than just casualties and destroyed worlds. The final accounting showed 12% of the galactic population lost, a staggering number that represented trillions of individual lives. But it was far less than the 78% the projections had predicted. Before humanity's intervention, entire species owed their continued existence to human sacrifice. Worlds that would have been consumed were now slowly rebuilding. Civilizations that faced certain extinction were planning their futures with hope. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. Something deep had shifted in how species viewed each other, and particularly how they viewed humanity. Ambassador Krellix stood before the council once again. 5 years ago, he had proposed repealing humanity's Special Forces designation based on 2 centuries of peace. Now he stood to propose something very different. We must address what happened during the Zalthene War, Krellix began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed horrors he could never forget. We asked humanity to save us from extinction. They did exactly that. But the methods they employed, the things they did. He paused, gathering himself before continuing. I have reviewed the classified reports from the front lines. I have spoken with commanders who fought alongside human forces. I have seen footage of human tactics that violates every convention of warfare we hold sacred. And I must acknowledge that everything they did was absolutely necessary. Brutal, horrifying, sometimes unspeakably cruel, but necessary for our survival. The chamber remained silent as Krellix continued. 3 months after the rift closed, we detected signals from the other side. They were human transponder codes. Reconnaissance drones emerged with data from beyond the rift. A holographic display activated showing images that made several delegates visibly recoil in horror. 3 Zalthene hive worlds. Massive organic structures that had housed billions of organisms. All 3 were now completely silent, their surfaces scarred with weapons impacts and biological sterilization burns. Each world bore the same marking human warning beacons transmitting in multiple languages. This system is quarantined by order of humanity and the Galactic Council. The Zalthene are extinct. Any attempt to revive or reconstruct this species will be considered an act of war. They didn't just drive the Zalthene back to their territory, Krellix explained with a shaking voice. They hunted them to complete extinction. They followed them through the rift, found their primary hive worlds, and systematically eliminated every last living organism. The reports indicate human forces spent 3 months beyond the rift, ensuring that no Zalthine would ever threaten anyone again. They deployed weapons that sterilized entire biospheres. They burned worlds down to bedrock. They were thorough to the point of absolute obsession. The Cerebral Collective representative added their detailed analysis. We estimate human forces eliminated between 4 and 5 trillion Zalthine organisms. This represents complete species extinction. No survivors, no remnants. No possibility of natural or artificial reconstruction. Furthermore, they continued with unusual emotion. Humans left behind permanent monitoring stations and automated defense platforms. If anything that even resembles Zalthine biology emerges from that region of space, it will be destroyed immediately and without warning. The council chamber filled with uncomfortable murmurs. What humans had done went beyond warfare into something else entirely: systematic extinction of an entire species across multiple worlds. We asked them to protect us, Krellick said quietly, and they did. But now we must decide what to do with a species that proved capable of genocide when we gave them explicit permission. The debate that followed was intense and multifaceted. Some argued that humanity should be designated as extinction class, a threat to all life that must be contained or controlled through force. Others countered that humans had only done what the Council had authorized and what was absolutely necessary for galactic survival. Admiral Zhenka, who had fought alongside human forces and witnessed their methods, provided testimony that shifted the entire discussion. I watched humans fight the Zalthine for months. I saw things that still haunt my dreams and probably always will. But I also saw something else that matters. Human casualties during the war were 43%. Nearly half their forces died fighting. They took the hardest assignments, the most dangerous missions, the battles no one else could win or even survive. And when it was over, when the Zalthine were eliminated completely, the surviving human forces came back through the rift before it closed permanently. They could have stayed on the other side, established colonies in former Zalthine territory, claimed those worlds as legitimate spoils of war. Instead, they came home. They destroyed the threat completely and returned immediately. They didn't try to expand their territory, didn't claim any worlds, didn't demand payment or compensation. They just came back and asked if there was anything else the galaxy needed. General Cross added his perspective from ground operations. My people pride ourselves on warrior culture spanning millennia. We thought we understood combat and warfare. Humans showed us we understood nothing at all. They fight with a dedication that borders on insanity, but they also know when to stop fighting. That restraint, Cross emphasized. That ability to be absolutely brutal when necessary, but peaceful by choice. That's what makes them special forces. Not the capacity for violence, but the wisdom to control it, and the discipline to stop. The human delegation sat quietly through these discussions. General Chun had returned from beyond the rift, scarred but alive. She carried herself with the same calm confidence she had before, but something in her eyes suggested she had seen things she would never speak about to anyone when called upon to address the council. Chun stood and faced the assembly. I won't apologize for what we did. The Zalthine gave us no choice. They would have killed everyone given the chance. We made sure they never got that chance. But I will acknowledge that what we did was terrible. Genocide is not something to be proud of, even when absolutely necessary. We eliminated an entire species. We made ourselves executioners for the galaxy. My soldiers will carry that burden for the rest of their lives. We did what you needed us to do, but that doesn't make it easier to live with or forget. Chun's voice hardened slightly. So when you debate what to do about humanity, remember this. We didn't want to show you what special forces really means. We spent 2 centuries being peaceful because we know exactly what we're capable of. You forced us to remember. We're not asking for gratitude or recognition. We're not demanding anything. We just want to go back to being peaceful. But now you all know what happens if someone threatens the galaxy again. The Arbiter called for proposals on how to proceed after extensive debate lasting days. The Council reached a decision that satisfied no one completely, but seemed the most practical. Humanity would retain its Special Forces designation with an additional notation. The new designation read, Special Forces Protectorate Species of Last Resort. Authorized for unrestricted warfare only in existential crisis situations. To be deployed only when all other options have failed. To be supported and never threatened additionally. The Council established protocols for monitoring and supporting human military forces, recognizing that asking humans to be the galaxy's ultimate defenders required providing them resources and ensuring they never felt threatened enough to act preemptively. Relations between humanity and other species evolved in unexpected ways over the following years. Some species maintained distance from humans, uncomfortable with what they had witnessed during the war. Others sought closer ties, recognizing that having humanity as allies was infinitely preferable to having them as enemies. Human colonies received special status in galactic territory agreements. No species wanted to risk even a minor border incident with humanity. Pirates and raiders gave human space the widest possible berth. The Threen warrior culture underwent a significant shift. Instructor Vashter created new training programs incorporating lessons learned from observing human tactics. His courses emphasized that true strength included knowing when not to fight. Scifistories, who had doubted the human stories 5 years earlier, now served as a council guard assigned to human diplomatic facilities. He had become genuine friends with several human marines and found them surprisingly normal when not in combat situations. One evening, he asked one of them, a sergeant named Marcus Chun, the question that everyone still wondered about. Why do you fight like that? What makes humans willing to go so far? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at something only he could see. Because someone has to stand against the darkness, he said finally. The galaxy is full of species that value peace, that have evolved beyond violence, that want to build and create and explore. That's beautiful and precious. That's how it should be. But it makes them vulnerable. There are things out there that don't share those values. Things like the Zalthine that only understand consumption and destruction. So someone needs to stand between